Okay, so here we go. And Vishnu, of course, has been doing this show for a long time. And if you go back and watch it, you'll see that he's had this, let's call it this struggle against the Nimzo-Indian for a long time. And I think I was the one who advocated him playing F3, the shear-off system. And I branded him as a attacking player, and I think he rebels against that classification now a little bit. But E3, you can get very interesting attacking games. I reviewed the book by Gligrich. It's called I Play Against Pieces. And if Vishnu wanted to play E3, or anyone wants to play E3, that's a good book to do it from. Very rich positions can arise. And one thing I'll stress here is that it's in all variations of the Nimzo, I think black is basically equal, but the advantages you get from doing this move order outweigh any kind of, like, let's call it objective equality that black might attain. Of course, you can learn specific systems very well. In this game, Vishnu is prepared for black, and my sense is that b6 is the one move where I'm convinced white does get an advantage, and exactly how Vishnu plays here. And now this odd move. Yeah, this is obviously weird, and Vishnu could do a variety of things with it, but it seems like he was prepared and played boom, boom, and now bishop e3. Okay, critical moment for black, and I think black is a little worse, but that he should play d5 and get some kind of business like this with a counterattacking game. I feel like we might even be transposing to something when I do this. It feels very familiar to me. In any case, what black does here with d6 is basically say, okay, you now have the space advantage. And one of the things that Vishnu has run into by playing f3 systems, both here, though it's obviously not in this game, but it turns into basically an f3 system, and against the King's Indian, is that he's essentially playing a lot of systems where he's playing with extra space. And space is hard. It is a very hard thing to master, and we're going to see that in this game as well. I could have entitled this Space. We're going to get one about space in a little bit as well with Chesterfish. But this one, well, it also just appealed to me because of the rook ending. But in any case, the first phase is going to be all about space, which is black is giving him. Queen d2, c5. I really despise this move from black because the problem with all these positions is that the bishop on b7 is bad anyway, and now it's completely done with d5. Okay, e takes. And now an interesting decision that I have a lot of sympathy with e takes. I'm sure I'm going to guess most GMs would play CD, but I would be really inclined to ED because it's a much more stable advantage where you don't have to really worry about b5 anymore, and you are better because the bishop is on b7. Maybe, I guess it's a stylistic thing, but definitely, when I think back on how I thought about Vishnu before, the attacking player, well, that's certainly that player's go-to move, because really white's going to play knight g3, and the party really is going to start, and a6, b5 is so slow in coming. Okay, with that said, let's look. E takes. I'm making fun of myself a little bit because I know that I think I would want to play e takes too. So here we go. Knight g3, knight bd7, bishop e2, bishop f8, castles, g6, rook a e1. Now all of this, I think I'm fine with. And in this position, I think is my sense where Vishnu needs a plan. And what he writes is that bishop g5 And he says, again, just wanted to play another useful move, pinning the knight, introducing some knight ge4 ideas. And so, right, again, let me stress, playing with time is difficult. And, excuse me, with space. Playing with time is actually much more easy. By playing with time, I, of course, mean just having more tempi. Now, my sense is that white is clearly better and that it is a very unpleasant position for black, both because of space and because the bishop on b7 is absolutely abysmal. Okay, so let's... And Foos Chess is saying on CD maybe bishop a6, and I can imagine something like that was probably his idea. This position, the first thing is that it's not clear that bishop g5 is necessary, and I don't think we want to be playing knight g4. And there's a hidden drawback of bishop g5, which is, given the way Vishnu has set himself up, I think he should be dreaming about playing f4, f5. That becomes a little bit more hard to realize once we play bishop g5, because we have to worry about like h6, and then if we ever do f5, we have to worry about g5. And that makes it might be possible to do it that way with a potential p-sack, but it's obviously much more complicated after bishop g5. So my sense in this position would be that f4 cannot be bad. And notice how cool the knight on g3 is. You don't often get this, where we have firm control over e4. And let's say what the basic idea for white should be. When he plays f4, it's not simply to murder black. We will probably murder black, but the first important thing we're doing is we're just saying, black, you're not moving anywhere, and I'm going to do things like f4, h3, bishop d3, and then when I'm ready, I will play f5. Okay, another move that you could do if you just wanted to wait would be a4. And we're going to talk a little bit more about a4 later, because there's a couple points where you didn't do it. All right, so bishop g5, a6, and here I thought, okay, Vishnu plays king h1. King h1 is probably fine, but I want to say on a practical level, I think you should be playing a4 as an intuitive response to a6. And the reason is this. Black's position is god-awful. It's really bad, though it's kind of hilarious that Jackson Chess is saying, am I the only one who wants to play black here? And because it's so awful, I think black should consider following the Russian maxim, if I could call it that, of saying, look, whenever you're in a really terrible position, that's when you should consider violently altering the structure of the position. So, for example, after king h1, black should really consider b5. He's still worse, there's no question about it. But notice, if we take it, then the bishop on b7 is doing something, right? And the extra pawn is mostly meaningless. It's now a Benko structure. So this would have been, I think, a way for black to change the flow, the tendency of the game. All right, but he plays queen c7, and now Vishnu's big crime with knight ge4. And, you know, one thing we've talked about a lot on the show is how mistakes come in pairs. And in general, my intuitive take on that and my experience of it as a player is that we'll continue to make bad moves until we kind of hit rock bottom and then be like, whoa, what happened there? Let's rethink that. And so let's say that the major problem of knight ge4 is that we are trading off pieces, and that is not what we want to do when we have more space. In particular, this knight, when we think about it, it's just in the way of everybody. It's in the way of everybody. In the bishop, the knight, everybody's in the way. And one of the reasons people trade off, and it's so hard to play with the space advantage, is it feels like white needs to do something, right? I think, of course, he should just play a4 and then think about f4. Notice there's no easy way for black to put his pieces. Rook e7 would be the natural rook move, but it's obviously a little bit unpleasant with the pin, right? Then we might consider arranging some kind of knight ge4. But in general, right, we don't want to do this. And then now we're going to get... oh, and this is funny. I hadn't read this one thing that Vishnu wrote. He put the position apparently on Twitter, and Eugene, like me, is just like, play a4. GM Eugene Perelstein, friend of the dojo. And right, yeah. And so that's useful, I think, for a player like Vishnu. Just realize that me and Eugene, we're just playing a4 without thinking about it, because our position is so good that we just don't want to allow any kind of b5 to happen. Okay, so knight ge4, knight takes, and now another capital crime with fe4. And I'm sure that Vishnu was driven by the idea that he was getting his f file open, but now, of course, the e5 square is black's. And you see this in a lot of Benoni's and Najdorf's, where the knight gets to e5, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, oh no, black is doing, there's no way you can hurt the guy anymore on knight e5. Amazingly, black ends up hurting himself in this game. But in general, after that knight gets to e5, it's such a beautiful plug of the position that only white has anything to fear. So Vishnu writes knight e4, f5, and suddenly black has activity. But still, this would have been much better for black, for white, than playing fe. Because after fe, we cannot contest e5. And notice there with f5, the fear that Vishnu is expressing, what happens is you think you're better, and then you say to yourself things like, well, okay, I got to rule knight e4 out because I was much better before and I have to still be better now. And that's a trap that everybody gets caught in. And then that's how you end up making mistakes. So this is, I guess, 3 in a row. And now I assume right around here Vishnu hits rock bottom, and now he's going to have to start playing again. Though he does make another debatable move coming up. So here we go. Rook f2, bishop c8. Let's say the obvious. The position has now dramatically shifted, and black is much better now. And the bishop on b7, partially because of the exchanges, now is a beautiful bishop. Black, in his turn, we're going to see, didn't understand that well. So bishop f6, and I agree with Vishnu. Rook ef1 would be much better. And the real problem, as I see it with bishop f6, is that that's your last good piece. And, you are giving him the dark squares in the sense that now his queen can come over, the king can come to g7. It looks very favorable. And your pieces, of course, especially these two minors over here, are doing bad. So bishop f6. And now I feel black is much, much better and makes an instructive mistake. And I'll just tell a story with this. I came of age in a generation where the Benoni was a very popular business. You had guys like Lev Sakis, you had guys like Shuba and DeFermian, and they were beautiful Benoni players. And now really with the advent of the computer, it becomes less palatable to play, and partly because the computer is a space fiend. It loves the bishops and it loves space more than the generation I grew up with. That's just a prejudice that the machine has. Okay, so long story. I remember analyzing with Nick, and we were looking at some Benoni position. This is obviously a fantastic Benoni position. And he got very upset when someone tried to trade this bishop off. And that's exactly what black does. And I think it's important to see, I think Vishnu's notes are great, but I wanted him to note that here, like bishop g4 question mark, because that bishop is amazing. And if you think of the Benoni as a cousin to the King's Indian, right? In the King's Indian, you put your pawns on dark squares as well, though it's e5 and d6 instead of d6 and c5. Well, sometimes in the King's Indian, you play d6, c5. The point is, the light square bishop is in fact a good bishop. Of course, before it was terrible because it was hitting the big rock on d5, right? So that's why. That's the reason why Benoni players should be very sensitive to that beautiful bishop. The other thing that's really obvious is that Vishnu's bishop on e2 is abysmal, an abysmal bishop, So let's just say the intuitive way for black to play would be something like queen e7, king g7, and then I don't know what white's going to do, but follow it up with bishop d7. And black is the one who has the juice on the king side, and probably at some point can play for h5 and start his own creepy crawly, over there. And white will have to figure out, really, does he want to leave the rook on f6? So I don't know, clear advantage for black. Some people, I can imagine de Fermian saying some sweeping statement of white is essentially lost. In any case, bad news for white. Bishop g4, he takes it. Queen e7. And I still like black, but it's not as strong as it was before. This rook ab8 isn't impressive because white wants to play a4 anyway. So black is going to drift for a couple moves here. I think black needs to start dreaming about how does he gain space, do things on the king side. And instead of rook b7, there's several plans. One would be rook f8 and just to play f6 to grab that square. Another would be h5 at some point. There may be rook h8 to start gaining space over there. And you could do h5 even with the f6 idea. Though to me, it seems like you could just do it. And we'll come back to the h5 move. Okay, good. In principle, good. Vishnu, knight d1. He comes over, and now a truly weird move with king f8. And I'm going to say for sure, black needs to be thinking about h5. We really want to keep the knight on e5. And so the second you get knight g4, and all of a sudden, this game is going to take on a whole new turn here. Whole new turn. By the way, so let me just say, Vishnu is going to be playing a tournament, I believe, this coming weekend. I'm really excited to see how he does. It's the first tournament on the East Coast that I know about that's actually going to happen over the board. Say Chess, whose game we're going to look at in a little bit, has been playing over the board a bunch, and we've had some other players doing that too, Europeans. They might go into some kind of crazy lockdown now. I have no idea. In any case, it'll be very interesting. There's a number of players on the dojo who've done a lot of work with their chess improvement. And so it's just interesting, let's say as a fan for me, to see Vishnu go off and play this tournament. Here he's playing somebody who is technically much higher rated at like 2160. And the basic question is just like, well, how good did Vishnu get? There was a lot of months there where he hasn't played. And so it'll just be real interesting to see how that goes. Say Chess is saying there's almost down lockdown mode over there. He's in Denmark. Okay. I hope Vishnu can do it. I imagine Vishnu's going to be playing with a mask, which is a little. Whenever I put on the mask, I get like a fogginess in my glasses, which would be really hard to. Maybe Vishnu has a plan about dealing with the fogginess. Any case, Queen F2, good move, and now we get this gun on the F file, and now we have to start liking White, and I don't like that move at all, but it was beginning to be hard to see what else we were supposed to do. Rook F6, simple and strong. My gut is now that White is just winning. We've got the better queen. We've got the better king. The pawn on D6 is weak. All right, here we go. Very nice probing moves. And now Vishnu goes for it and takes on D7. And I think this is fundamentally fine. What I want to add, though, this I think is a little bit important, is really, I don't think there's any rush. So even though I think some strong players would take on D7 as well, I think there's a school of thought that would say, you know what, let's just make an improving move. But okay, I think it was correct. And here's the thing that I think is important to understand, that Vishnu needed to see it, a variation they needed to see before he went into this. Maybe I'm wrong, but in any case, the following idea, if he had seen it going into it, which I think he probably wanted to, that if he had found the idea, he would have found, I think, the necessary idea in the game too. So let me just share. Black could consider this weird ending, and he might be well lost after King G1 as well, but the way for it to be just easy for White is to play E5 now. And then this isn't going to be winning. We're going to walk the king up to E4, put the guy in Suksong, game over. Okay, so we're going to get this position, and now Vishnu correctly says, and he's absolutely right, that we want E5 here. Yeah, and yeah, boom, boom. And it really is game completely over. One of the things I tried to stress in my rook ending boot camp was that you need to appreciate that you got two pieces, just two, king and the rook. And it's the activity of both of those that's critical. And the beauty of this pawn sacrifice is this rook just becomes an absolute terror. And our king will come over. And one thing I really tried to stress in the boot camp is that in the rook ending, the king's activity will often be defined as just being the blockader of the pawn. So that white king, for example, will easily blockade the e-pawn. We don't need to win the thing. The king just goes over there and sits in front of it. There's no rush. We're in control of that pawn. So anyways, I'm trying to say that there are rules to figuring out what it means to be active or passive in the rook ending. And one of them is to focus on the Lucena and the Philidor. The Lucena, the king shepherds the pawn. The Philidor, the king blockades the pawn. All right, so here we go. King h2, rook e7, rook e1. I had some questions about rook e1. I thought maybe rook f4. But there, I thought rook f4. Here, I want black very much to play rook e5 and king e7 and to try to hold the business. In the game, he wanders over to the queen side, and I think no way, because the white king is coming up, and the white king, once it gets to f4, will threaten both e5 and the invasion, which I think is a big deal, to g5 and either f6 or h6. So let's look at what happens here. b5. I don't know what you're doing, buddy. I don't know. Sniff, sniff. And here's a very strange move, Vishnu, that I feel like you should have commented on. You play king f3. And of course I want you to play king f4. right? Yeah, king f4, and this heart attack city now for black. Heart attack city. Very tough to know what the guy's supposed to be doing. Yeah. Now, maybe, yeah, I don't, yeah. You know, if you were afraid of rook f7, you could still go back to g3. The guy's got to go back to e7. And so if he checks you, it's the same deal, whether you go to f3 or f4. And with f4, I feel like, yeah, activity, king activity. Okay, so here we go. Boom. King e3. Again, it doesn't feel active. g5. Let me just say something about your opponent. He is trying to be aggressive or something over there. You've just got more force. You got your king hanging out over there, you know? So yeah, you're going to be winning. He's helping you by coming forward. g3. And here you got an under a minute left, and things kind of go back and forth. And he says, Vishnu says, while I won't criticize myself for taking the draw, because I do think it is important to go into an over-the-board tournament with some confidence, I do, in fact, rue the fact that I didn't even think of rook activity in the ending. Okay. Now, let me just say, I think, Vishnu, when you play this tournament this weekend, you have every reason to hope to play well against these guys, and they're not going to give you that many opportunities, right? It's not going to be like every game you get this winning position, and so, right, you need to push it when it comes to a position like this. Yeah, and you are totally winning here because it's very, maybe it's not easy, but he has to always bear in mind e5. e5, de, king e4. Anytime it happens, it's going to be the end of the world for him. And your rook, as you said, is ready to come in.